Oh,
Hi there.
so
It is
nice to meet you.
lovely to meet you too.
Congratulations on Sundance.
Thank you.
How was it? How was the virtual experience for you?
It, I think the visual experience for anyone is just a bit haywire. I had a couple of weird encounters. On the one hand, it was incredibly strange, but on the other hand, it felt almost surreal, but like something you encountered in a dream before. It's just, and I think because of watching films like The Matrix and whatnot, we have been prepared for a time where we wouldn't get to communicate face
Yeah.
to face,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so walking into these virtual spaces, it's almost surreal that it's happening, but we have been kind of prepared for it, to
Yeah.
be honest, with all the media that's been out. It's not as strange as it seems.
I know I'm definitely ready for the real world. I miss being, at Park City and being in person and being able to talk to people and just the whole energy around these premieres and these screenings. It's very different. I think the discussions are more intimate sometimes with Zoom because you're kind of a captured audience, but
Yeah.
otherwise I miss it.
Yeah, I mean, we got sent these Oculus VR headsets, right?
Hmm.
From Sundance and the sponsors. And it was amazing how when we got into these artists like meeting rooms,
Hmm.
you kind of use technology or any other technology to connect. So you
Yes.
couldn't have a phone in hand because you couldn't see it. You were completely immersed into this environment. And so how
Hmm.
something so digital you had to have like a pen and paper. And I mean, I got pens and papers and people's names on here and whatnot, but it's crazy how something so like virtual could bring you back to the reality. I mean, you write people's names down,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So the progression is regression, man. It was strange, but it was cool.
It's very interesting. Yeah, we did the same thing with the VR, with the film parties
Yes.
afterwards, after the screenings to discuss, how we felt about the films and the lessons learned and things like that. And that was actually very nice because I've been in quarantine by myself for months. And so it gave me an opportunity to kind of feel like I'm talking to people who have
Uh,
shared interests
yeah.
in a quasi
Yeah.
reality space. So it was nice.
Refreshing. I made friends more than I make at home. I was like chatting to people from all over the world, and I was there like, what's up, guys? And I
Yeah.
mean, it's virtual, right? So there's no COVID, so you can
Mhm.
actually like your virtual self can get up to people and like hug them and stuff like that.
It's beautiful, beautiful. Well, I do want to talk to you about your wonderful film, Five Tiger.
Sure.
As I mentioned to you when I emailed you, I have done a lot of work in Africa. So my background is actually in international development, and I'm
Okay.
trained as a gender specialist and sustainability specialist. So I work a lot in the agricultural sector with
Mm.
women who are forming cooperatives and who are trying to do things in the agricultural and food space. And so, as you know, all throughout the continent, women are the primary producers when it comes to food. And a
Mm.
lot of the economic and social constraints that they face are wrapped up in that sector. So that's what really sparked my interest in wanting to watch this film. I've never been to South Africa. I've never done work in South Africa. And the first thing that struck me was how similar just the lifestyle of the woman Fiona in the film was, and some of the dynamics of her relationship to her family and her community. And it was just very, it took me back, to a place I haven't been able to go to in the past year. And I just thought it was really a powerful film. I want to know a little bit about you and your background. What made you decide to do this particular film? What was your motivations, and some of the issues and why they were important to you?
So I'm a Johannesburg native. Uh, I grew up in this weird, tumultuous, sometimes place where the toggle between traditional modernity is actually quite real, and we're always like as part of the Zulu nation, and as a Khumalo, as a Mzilikazi who was my ancestor was famous for being the King Shaka Zulu's like military leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been a toggle between, do we now adapt and are we with the modern? Are we, are we fully immersed in this new modern culture, or are we still traditionalists, and are we authenticated in those spaces? And so traveling between the two has always led me into a space where you cannot look at us as a society without understanding our present reality and our past and who we were,
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you're dealing in those spaces, it's often, it helps to look into the past, and it helps to look at a society just not with who they currently are, but who they were. And we find that erasure due to apartheid was something that actually kind of held us back. So we're barred from our own history in a sense that we're not encouraged to learn it as well. And I mean, I was working on a telenovela, and I came across a woman who was a prostitute, essentially, on the outskirts of Johannesburg, on a town called Walkerville. And you had a lot of textile factories, in that area. And due to modernization and due to the new agreements we have and so on and so forth, in the political climate of South Africa, you find that a lot of the economic, functionality happens within the city centers. So these women are forgotten, they're left behind. They're almost caught in a time capsule. And here they are, and all they have to sell is their bodies and the whatever they have to their disposal around them, to slow down and be able to have an opportunity to talk to them, and to engage in who they are, is something that I still find problematic in our communities. We're not encouraged to do that because of our culture and our religion. We'd rather treat them as invisible. And so we're so focused in the reality of the new Black woman being so progressive and so forward and having it all and being, all that we do neglect the fact that there are still some people trapped in a time capsule. I watched a beautiful film yesterday called A Promising Young Woman, where they portrayed her as someone kind of caught and captured in a time when, this sexual assault happened. And I find that very true of our traumas as a society, that our traumas have a way of catching us. So, I got a chance to talk to her. We had a great time as I was helping her pick up her sticks, because she was selling firewood as well, and the thin piece of fabric tore. And so as I was, kind of helping her, I was like, what's up with you? What's happening? How do I join the business? Because I don't get paid enough. Yeah, she had a sense of humor. And so she was just like, life is real, but I tithe and I play the lotto, and one day God's going to see me, and she's like, yeah, my kid, she annoys me, she bought sweets with her friend, and they were playing raffle at these schools, and at these white schools, they're always about civvies and fundraisings and this and this and that. And she went on, and the daughter didn't realize how much the mother went through, to get her the money. So it got me kind of thinking about the generational trauma, who we were, how we learn about femininity from where we come from, and how we express that in the future, and how we express that with a media that would rather we treat ourselves in a hostile manner. I'm rambling a little bit, but it's something that I don't often get to talk to other Black women about, and we don't get to express. But it hurts, man. It hurts. It hurts the fact that we are helpless in these situations where we see other women.
I think, there's so much that falls on the shoulders of women. They are looked to, take care of everyone except themselves, and they're expected to take care of everyone, even at their own peril. And that's definitely something that really, spoke to me in this film, because she's suffering. She's in a lot of pain, and she's silently suffering. And it doesn't seem like there's anyone in her world who even acknowledges her suffering. In terms of the daughter, so the fact that her daughter didn't know just how precious that money was something that stood out to me. Is it a common element of the culture to not discuss financial troubles with your children?
Yeah, I think a Sotho saying that says a woman holds the knife on the sharp side. And
Mm,
we're often, women are often referred to, and especially women from the apartheid era who had fought in the struggle, are referred to as imbogodo, which are these stones. So a woman is like a rock, you strike a woman, you strike a rock. But there is this perception that we are strong and that we are incapable of damage, being hurt, and incapable of feeling. So the culture of silence is one that I wanted to break with this film, particularly when you look at women in the religious spaces, because, you know, um, women that go through a lot tend to lean into religion quite heavily in order to justify their pain, but
mhm,
also to lean into the teachings that, your pain makes you stronger, and makes you stronger makes you better.
mhm,
And so you find that a lot of women in those spaces that come in with those traumas get exploited, because they're grasping at whatever they can just to keep themselves going, as opposed to treating the original problem.
mhm,
But there is that sense that women are supposed to withhold everything, and yeah, it's not healthy.
mhm, mhm,
Mm,
mhm. Wow. I noticed the duplicitous nature of the pastor. Of course, he
yeah.
is centerpiece. But one
Mhm.
thing that he says that really struck me in the film is that he says, when he comes to visit and see the husband, brother, husband, father, child of God, the man who has nothing to give is no longer breathing.
Mm.
Why do you think he chose those particular words in talking to the husband?
Because we grapple, especially in the local context of South Africa, we grapple, and I'm pretty sure it's not endemic to South Africa alone, but toxic masculinity is a thing. That as a man, you're meant to
Mm,
provide, and in a way, in different ways in which you choose to exist, you're ultimately a provider. So the only way
mhm,
you cannot provide, and there's a duality to that, because sometimes, men take their own lives because they believe that through their policies and whatever financial
mm,
plans they have going on in terms of insurance, they can provide for their families, but they're looked at as providers, and kind of nothing else. So we chose those words specifically because that's also an element in which the pastor sees of himself, because even men of God see themselves as providers, as people that are always meant to be taken from. And when they in themselves intrinsically believe that they have nothing to give, begins the degradation of the indulgence in drugs. And we have a high femicide rate in South Africa. And it's often you find that the men that kill women are men that believe that they have nothing else to give. So this is also what we wanted this
mm,
particular piece of dialogue to speak to, and the fact that he recognizes the fact that a man is only a man because of his ability to provide. And
mhm,
so, as long as he keeps himself alive, and as long as he keeps his spirit alive, and that by way doing that through the church, he then is still worthy of, you know, of of being in the space of consuming oxygen, of, of being given the right to be alive. Mm,
interesting, interesting. What really stood out to me about that was that he knows
mm,
where she's getting the money and that it's not coming from him because he's directly involved. And I was wondering if there was like an ulterior motive going on. Is he sincere in his desire to, help this man feel, like he's still a man? Or, was he trying to, you know, have a play on words, so to speak? So I was a little, torn. Like, where is he coming from with this?
so Five Tiger for me is a part of an anthology. There is some works in development that looks
Mm,
at
mm,
expanding on the different viewpoints. And so
mhm,
some of these questions are not meant to be answered. They're a snapshot and a part of a bigger picture. Because
mhm,
also in tackling media representation and how women are represented and how women's tragic stories are represented in the media, is only seeing Fiona as a woman who lost her virtue and got involved with her pastor, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And what often would happen in South Africa, because of our GBV rate and because of our femicide rate, is that the husband would see this and harm her in some way.
Oh.
And so, you know, the local audience are kind of like, whoa, like she's she's gonna die, or some of, you know, are like, oh my goodness, this pastor is gonna get exposed and his life is gonna come to it. Shows people's positions, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there's a strong polarity in terms of what happens. But we are looking at, you know, there's a bigger conversation to this, and so I'm speaking to our local government, and I'm speaking to a few people that side in terms of looking at the perspective, you know, from the daughter's point of view. Because if you imagine the youth that are being raised, I mean, if you were raised to believe that your mother was a so-called no good prostitute that would sell herself to a pastor, and that got hurt by your father, your idea of femininity is and shaped around your ideas of who your mother was or is, right? And so it's looking at that, but also looking at how we deal with toxic masculinity and how we use architecture, how we use social media, you know, how we use television, how we use just the things that we have available to us to negotiate gender. Because you know, the thing about being African is gender is a bit of a strange concept, because when you look into, you know, being African, and if you look into the African culture, there are a lot of things that clash with the notion of gender. It almost feels like gender was introduced to try and rationalize characteristics of people. But if you look into our spiritual practices, you look into our being, our way of being, it clashes with the notion of gender and clashes with the notion of prescribed, you know, sort of positions within gender. And so when you look at it in the modern context, it almost feels counterintuitive. So yeah, to in a very long way answer your question, there is a bigger conversation being had, and we would appreciate the interaction, because at the end of the day, these films are created to have some kind of real world effect, right? They're meant to
Mm-hmm.
make us feel something. They're meant to make us talk about something. And if we don't use the opportunities we have to have the most pressing conversations, then why are we here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think, one of the things that really always stand out to me in dealing with, people from the continent and in the diaspora is that there
Mm,
is so much cultural similarity. There's
yeah.
so many things that transcend where
Mm,
we as Black people, as Black women find ourselves in the
mm,
world.
mm,
And, the issue of, for example, silent pain, that's very real, for African Americans. It's very real for Black women in the Caribbean. It's, something that seems to just be an inherent part of how we navigate the world. And, here in the United States, there's been a lot of conversation lately around, the title of the strong Black woman. And
mm,
is that something that is actually an attribute, or is it something that is harming us?
mm,
Because we do have higher rates of domestic abuse. We do have, a lot of health issues that center around not taking care of ourselves physically and mentally. And, yet we are portrayed as these women who are less feminine, less in need of caring, less in need of protecting. And, many people are saying, in the creative spaces, media, we need to change the narrative. We need to show that we are not, these magical women who can
mm,
just, take anything and keep moving.
mm,
These things do cause real harm to
yeah.
us. And I do think that is something that is consistent. And I have seen it in every country that I've worked, and I've worked in several, worked, all the way from Mali in the West to Uganda to Mozambique to Kenya, many countries. And there are a lot of similarities. And the pushback, as a, working in the gender space is always coming from, this dichotomous dynamic of men versus women that you
Mm,
see in the Western context, particularly amongst Caucasian men and women. It's
yeah.
not really something that translates to the African understanding of that type of partnership between men and women. So when you go in and you start talking about women's rights and women's needs, it's almost like, what are you doing? You know, you're coming with this Eurocentric, you know,
Yeah.
perspective, creating this problem where there is no problem. And it's also intertwined.
Mm.
I think that your film has a lot of power because there are so many questions that it raises in the viewer, and there is so much conversation that can be had. And I think that we're all going to come to it with so many different perspectives based on where we are in the world.
Mm.
You know, for me, like, you know, as an American woman, I'm thinking, you know, prostitution should be legal. You know, you do what you want to do with your body. It's up to you.
It's
Between
work. It is work. If you get paid to do something, it is work.
Yes, it is work, you know, but I know that it's because of the context
Yeah.
in which I was raised that I'm able to see that, you
Mm.
know, but someone else would be like, oh my gosh, you know, it's the worst thing ever. Yeah, I don't want to go on and on, but I just feel like there's so many questions and so many ways in which this film could be used to evoke dialogue.
Mm.
Um, and topics that we don't talk enough about as Black women. We really don't. We don't talk about the importance of making sure that we take care of ourselves, making sure that we have healthy relationships, making sure that we teach our children to understand the realities of life and what we go through and why that matters.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, this film and, you know, what's rewarding about you as a filmmaker, I know you said that you want to use it as sort of a piece for activism. What are you most proud of? Like, what to you is the most powerful part of having made this film?
I guess, you know, when you make a film of this nature that is incredibly personal and quite local, the one thing that doesn't ever appeal, I mean, that just it never sits with you is the idea that other people in different parts of the world could resonate with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of this strong Black woman for me came in different shapes and sizes. Firstly, for me there wasn't only one idea of a strong Black woman. There was the American strong Black woman, right, who was famous and you could see on TV. And then there was the
Mm.
strong Black woman that, you know, was in politics in my country. And then there was the strong Black woman that you kind of never got to see. The one like the protagonist in my film, who was strong for nothing, who was like a Moses, who would wander around the desert for 40 years and never quite get where she was going to, who always gave herself. And so, you know, there wasn't one type of strong Black woman. And so for me, the most fascinating thing about this film is the fact that the other type of strong Black woman could get recognized, because I grew up in a time, and I mean, I was born in 1990, and you know, by then you had some kind of progress. You had pictures of other strong Black women on television, and so even when we saw their tears more often than we saw their smiles, there was still a template, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what got us where we are. But you know, her her success depended on the fact that she leaned too heavily into alcohol, she had some kind of flaw, she was this or she was that. And so to see a flawed Jezebel type of a strong Black woman be appreciated across the seas is something that I find incredible, because that's who we grow from, that's who we are, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Yeah, more than anything else as a filmmaker, I mean, there's a lot of things that I could mention, but just the idea that someone like that could find resonance in the world and could be loved, and her story could be heard of, you know, and she could take up some space.
Mm-hmm.
That was just fascinating to me. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
I think it's a story that a lot of people can identify with. Because even if you're not talking about prostitution, you know,
Mm.
there are many ways to have transactional relationships. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of women, and people are going to be upset, but oftentimes marriage is actually quite transactional. You know, you choose a husband for comfort in many parts of the
I
world, for
mean,
many women,
I
even
mean,
right here today.
I mean, I grew up
Yes.
listening to Jill Scott, right? So my education on like romantic relationships came from, you know, Miss Jilly from Philly. And
Mhm.
sometimes you understand that it's like you give so much of yourself and you get hurt, but the transaction is kind of still the same. You
Yes.
give to somebody who just does not, and the reciprocity is just not there. And so Five Tiger for me was a very Jill Scott-esque relationship where her love for the church was not reciprocated.
Mm-hmm.
And this was somebody that gave so much. She tithed and she believed in the structure, and sometimes she sacrificed her own morals and her own values. And she did not get that kind of love back.
Mm-hmm.
It, it's a universal story,
Yes.
we explore it in many different contexts, but
Mhm.
this is what, stood true for me.
And that message is really, really driven by the tithing at the end. You
Mm,
know, no matter what, she's still giving.
she gives.
That was to me so like, wow, very powerful, very powerful. Um, I think, one of the things that I want to ask you before I have to let you go is in terms of the future and where do you see this going? I know you said that it's going to be a part of a series and there are other stories to be told, but ultimately, like, where do you see yourself with your career as a filmmaker and these types of stories? Like 5 years from now, where will you be?
So I think these stories for me are about cleaning up house, doing a bit of stock taking with regards to the things we believe in, who we are, and where we stand culturally. I hope that my stories will really propel me forward at the table of culture making, and that we can start to have honest conversations um, with everyone, I guess, about who we are and why we believe the things we believe. But I really would like to see myself in a position where I am re-engineering the image of Africa and how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves as global citizens, and how we then use the things that make us uniquely African to propel us forward. Because I think imagery plays a huge role in who we ultimately become. We have to see it to believe it, and in order to do so, we have to dig deep in the well of what our history tells us about ourselves, and not necessarily the public opinion. So it's quite ambitious, but I hope to get myself to the point where I'm really invested in learning about who we are, and ultimately the things and the tenets of our beliefs as Africans, but also our history, because I believe that that's perhaps one of the only ways to move us forward, the only ways to connect us, because whether you're on a continent or in the diaspora, ultimately, energetically, we are connected. And
Mhm.
so if we can then start creating work that ultimately reminds us of who we are, allowing us to tap back into intuitive knowledge and dream systems and all kinds of things, we may
Mhm.
be able to get back in touch with each other, and who we were
Yes,
always ultimately meant to be.
yes, that's so beautiful.
This is love, man. It's love. It's love.
It
Ultimately,
is.
you wanna, yeah, you want to spread the message of love. You want to spread the idea that, um, irrespective of distance or positioning, love is something that conquers all, and that's
Yes.
ultimately who we believe we are.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
made to love.
Well, the time is definitely now. I feel like, we as a people are really starting to understand our
Yeah.
collective voice as well as our collective struggle. I think the political events of 2020, what sparked off here in the United States and what happened around the world in terms of awareness around racial issues and economic disparity and, political disparities. I
Mhm.
think that, Black people are really starting to understand how connected we are and why we have to support one another no matter where we find ourselves and tell these stories. I think your work is very much in needed, very important, and I am here for it. I will be following you. I will be there the next time you have a showing because I feel like, watching that movie was just so good for my soul. And I'm excited to see, what other people have to say once they get a chance to see it. Do you know what the distribution schedule is going to be? When will it be available to wider audiences?
So I'm gonna have to keep you posted on that. It has not yet premiered in Africa, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, once we get that going, which we hope will be around June,
Mm-hmm.
COVID willing, we'll be able to. I mean, yeah, if you guys keep your eye on my Instagram page, Nomawonga _Khumalo. Yeah, I'll keep you guys posted.
Please do, please do.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you again so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for this wonderful gift of this film. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will look forward to hearing from you again really soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.